Yeah. Better days, I pray for better days. Working hard cause I want extra pay. Talk to them seeds, but you must demonstrate. Cause it's your ways that they gon' imitate. Non-violent. Sometimes I wish I would've went to college. Frown proudly. Cause where I'm from, they hate you when you smiling. Your faith should be your gun. You can't leave home without it. The children being grown, cause all the parents acting childish. You show them your reality, I bet they doubt it. You tell them all about your dreams, that's when they out it. Your own blood, ain't no family no more. They do you badly for show. You try to patch up your soul, Lord knows you on a mission to show him you so submissive. The prayer said in silence, you know the devil can hear him, pay attention. Know the war's within, how much time do you spend? Try to balance your zen, then again, losses is lessons. You tell me you trying to win, we know about saving money. You tell me you trying to spend that blood on it. Sweat, tears, you put that love on it. Your best years was just a dumb moment. You tired of going hungry, can't deal with fake making your life lonely. Your lack of faith that left your soul bony. But you gon' work and you gon' strive, do what it takes to survive. What is truth, what is a lie? You know that war's inside. Some get draped into the fake, they don't know what to decide. Wrong choice, meet your demise, keep that between you and I. You realize, some people you gon' let go, you visualize. The things you need to feed your soul is on the rise. They not gon' wanna let you go, but it's alright. It's cool to bury what's gon' grow. Went from wrong to the right and to the dark to the light. It was a hell of a fight. You give it all your might. Gotta hold on tight and you stay strong and precise. You fight the war that's inside, cause it might change your life. From wrong to the right and to the dark from the light. It was a hell of a fight. You give it all your might. You just hold on tight and you stay strong and precise. You fight the war that's inside, cause it might change your life. I ain't the person that I used to be. So what I do today ain't things that you used to see. Stay the same, no, things change usually. Some folk I may know might get reintroduced to me. Yeah, I ain't the person that I used to be. So what I do today ain't things that you used to see. Stay the same, no, things change usually. Some folk I may know might get reintroduced to me.
Yeah. Don't be stressing on the dumb shit, cause God is gonna make a way. Just keep going and keep your faith, so you can win this race. This race called life, yeah, yeah. This race called life. This race called life, yeah, yeah. Race called life. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm grinding 'cause I know that I'm gon' get it. I just gotta have vision, keep faith and be humble. Have some patience with it. I've been A1 since day one, been always on my job. I never been a fake, never had to steal and rob. Cause I do good business, I'm too good with it. And even though I'm on this road, I'm still daddy to my children. You know I do good with them, and don't like being missing. But I hate when my bills are thicker and my pockets get thinner. But I can't stress upon the dumb shit, cause God is gonna make a way. I keep going and keep my faith and my pace, so I can win this race. Win this race called life. This race called life. I'm just trying to win this race called life. This race called life. This race called life, yeah. Race called life. I'm just trying to win this race called life, yeah, yeah, yeah. I keep on running in this race called life. 'Cause I'm just trying to win this race called life. This race called life. Girl, I just gotta win this race called life. This race called life. Just gotta win this race called life.
Pike, every year thousands of pilgrims come to this place, Palestine, to discover their spiritual roots. Yet today it is not just the religious. Mankind in general is turning its attention toward this land. Most of us realize that if World War III erupts, it could begin right here in a collision between Arab and Jew. What are the causes of this conflict between Arab and Jew? A conflict which never seems to go away. Before Zionist settlers came here around the turn of the century, this region was not particularly known for strife. Yet since then, it has known little but strife. Is there something within Judaism itself which acts as an abrasive on this land? To answer that question, we don't need to make another pilgrimage to Palestine. We don't need to visit historic sites or Jewish shrines. Instead, since Judaism is very much a religion of its literature, we need to go where its most sacred teachings are preserved. We need to go to a synagogue, in particular, the library of a synagogue. In every synagogue library, we find hundreds of books, but there are a few which tower above the rest in authority. These include the Encyclopedia Judaica, the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, the Jewish Encyclopedia. In the oldest of these, the Jewish Encyclopedia, we encounter fascinating new perspectives on the inner teachings of Judaism, perspectives which are well known to most religious Jews, but unknown to Christians.
Most Christians believe that the Judaism of the Old Testament is very similar to Judaism today. Yet the Jewish Encyclopedia, in its article on Judaism, says modern Judaism and the Judaism of the Old Testament are very different. It says that after Nebuchadnezzar conquered Judah in the 6th century BC and led the Jews to distant Babylon, the Jews were faced with challenges to their faith they had never before experienced. Ever since the time of Solomon, the religion of Israel had centered around the magnificent temple in Jerusalem with its sacrifices and rituals. The question now became, how could one be a true Jew in a very foreign, even hostile environment? The need arose for a certain class of lay priests, called scribes or sopherim, to interpret the law in this new setting and make it workable. In time, these scribes became what the New Testament calls the scribes and Pharisees, the greatest legal authorities of Israel for all ages. The Pharisees said there were really two inspired revelations to the Jews. There was the written law of Moses, received atop Sinai, but there was also the oral tradition acquired by 70 elders who came to the base of the mountain but were forbidden to proceed farther. The Pharisees said that these 70 elders, or Sanhedrin, received a much more extensive and profound revelation than Moses, a revelation which was never written down, yet took precedent over the written law. When Jesus came on the scene, his reaction was to bitterly denounce this counterfeit tradition. Christ said the Pharisees, by their tradition, had made the law of God of none effect. He considered the Pharisees the most dangerous leadership Israel ever had. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Although Jewish sects such as the Sadducees now disappeared, the Pharisees emerged with even greater power over the Jewish people. The Jewish Encyclopedia describes the new role of the Pharisees. With the destruction of the temple, the Sadducees disappeared altogether, leaving the regulation of all Jewish affairs in the hands of the Pharisees. Henceforth, Jewish life was regulated by the Pharisees. The whole history of Judaism was reconstructed from the Pharisaic point of view. Pharisaism shaped the character of Judaism and the life and thought of the Jew for all of the future. In 135 AD, all Jews were expelled from Palestine. The Pharisees led most Palestinian Jews in a mass migration back to Babylon. The majority of Jews were already in Babylon and had been since the time of Nebuchadnezzar 600 years earlier. Yet around 140 AD, Babylon became the acknowledged land of refuge for world Jewry. For another 1,000 years, Judaism flourished in Babylon under the leadership of the Pharisees. Great academies of the rabbis were established and thousands of new laws formulated. There, those same Pharisees who killed Jesus Christ remained the undisputed rulers of Judaism.
In Babylon, the Pharisees codified their oral traditions into the Babylonian Talmud, the written form of that oral tradition which Jesus so bitterly rebuked. The Talmud reveals how deep was Israel's apostasy. In her beginning, God gave the Hebrews the loftiest, the most upright literature and ethics the world has ever known. Yet when they turned their backs on him, they produced the Talmud, a work which has aptly been called a monument to human folly. The Talmud also helps us understand the basis for Christ's unflattering descriptions of the Pharisees.
Jesus described the Pharisees as hypocrites, children of hell, blind guides, whited sepulchres, full of dead men's bones. He even described the Pharisees as children of their father the devil, a murderer from the beginning. The Talmud confirms Christ's words. In the Talmud, in Treatise Sanhedrin, an extensive passage describes the right of the Pharisee to kill anyone, just as long as he did so indirectly. As one of dozens of examples, the Talmud tells us that if one bound his neighbor and he died of starvation, he is not liable to execution. In such an indirect manner, the Pharisees also killed Christ. Manipulating the Romans to actually wield the spear and sword, the Pharisees claimed, as their descendants do today, that since the Romans were the direct cause of the death of Christ, it is the Romans, not the Jews, who are guilty. Christ also called the Pharisees adulterers, an adulterous generation. The Talmud provides generous loopholes for adultery. It says the penalty for adultery does not include sex with a minor, the wife of a minor, or the wife of a heathen. The Talmud also encourages seduction of unwed adolescent girls called designated bondmaids. But it's important how such rapes are performed. With the designated bondmaid, one is guilty only in the case of natural connection, but not in the case of perverse connection. The Pharisees reasoned that rape in a perverted manner is outside the jurisdiction of the law. Normal rape, however, was punishable. In Babylon, sexual perversion of every kind had been a way of life for millenniums. The Pharisees were deeply influenced by such practices.
In 3 of the major treatises of the Talmud are found extensive passages which give legal endorsement to seduce and marry 3-year-old baby girls. In fact, many of the greatest rabbis of the Talmud, including Simeon ben Yochai, upheld this privilege. Today in Israel, thousands of Jews go to Meron every year to venerate the memory of Simeon ben Yochai, one of the most respected rabbis in the history of Judaism.
In one of dozens of endorsements of child sex, Simeon ben Yochai said, "A proselyte under the age of 3 years and a day is permitted to marry a priest." Agreeing with ben Yochai, the great Rabbah said, "When a grown-up man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing, for when the girl is less than this 3 years and a day, it is as if one put the finger into the eye." The footnote to this passage says, "As tears come to the eye again and again, so does virginity come back to the little girl under 3 years." The same section confirms that sexual activity with small boys is in the same category. The intercourse of a small boy is not regarded as a sexual act. In addition to adulterers, Christ, in the story of the Good Samaritan, portrayed the Pharisees as racial bigots, too self-righteous to respond to the suffering of one who was not a Jew. It is true, because of the wickedness of the Canaanites, which included sodomy and infant sacrifice, Israel had been commanded by God to be harsh in her treatment of the inhabitants of the land. God made it clear that the Canaanites were not simply to be avoided, but destroyed. By the time of the New Testament, this method of preserving God's kingdom by separation and the sword had become obsolete, God no longer made a racial difference between men.
But the Pharisees were unfazed by God's new agenda. The Talmud was finally written down nearly 5 centuries after Christ, yet its critical, even homicidal attitudes toward Gentiles might have been lifted out of the book of Joshua. However, the quickest way to grasp the Talmudic view of Gentiles is not directly from the Talmud, but from the Jewish encyclopedias. If we quote an isolated opinion from the Talmud, a rabbi may quickly object, saying, "But that is not the overall opinion of the Talmud. That is not the definitive view." What the Jewish encyclopedia provides us is a definitive overview of perhaps hundreds of rabbinic statements on any subject, giving us accurate summaries of what the Talmud generally teaches.
In its article on Gentiles, the Jewish Encyclopedia begins to define what makes a Jew so different from a Gentile. According to the rabbis, only Israelites are men. Gentiles they class not as men, but as barbarians. Since Gentiles are not men in the fullest sense, so the Gentile is not a neighbor of a Jew. Further, since Gentile laws were too crude to admit of reciprocity, meaning too crude to be taken seriously, the Gentile was forever beneath the Jew. Gentiles were outlawed by God from the beginning, and thus had no property rights. The Almighty offered the Torah to the Gentile nations also, but since they refused to accept it, he withdrew his shining legal protection from them and transferred their property rights to Israel, who observed his law. Since the Talmud outlawed the child, or issue of a Gentile, as that of a beast, a Gentile had as little legal rights in a Jewish court as did an animal. The Talmud states that if a Gentile sue an Israelite, the verdict is for the defendant, the Israelite. Conversely, if the Israelite is the plaintiff, he obtains full damages. Because the Talmud conspires against Gentiles, if a Jew was ever caught telling a Gentile what the Talmud really says, such a person deserves death. So vile was the nature of a Gentile that the great Simeon ben Yohai said, "The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed. The best of snakes ought to have its head crushed." Jews, however, are exalted beings in the Talmud, worthy of praise. Christ described the Pharisee who blessed himself, saying, "I thank thee, Lord, that I am not as other men." An eminent Talmudic rabbi says the same. "Blessed be thou, who hast not made me a Goy, or Gentile." There is a special antagonism between the Talmud and Jesus. The Talmud attacks him everywhere it can, even his mother. Mary, the Talmud says, was a whore who mated with carpenters. She who was the descendant of princes and governors played the harlot with carpenters. It naturally followed that the scribes declared Christ to be a bastard. In its article on Jesus, the Jewish Encyclopedia says that Jewish writings defame Christ. It is the tendency of all these sources to belittle the person of Jesus by ascribing to him illegitimate birth, magic, and a shameful death. Jesus, according to this article, was considered one of the 3 worst enemies of Judaism who came to an ignoble end. The Talmud says they subjected him to 4 deaths: stoning, burning, decapitation, and strangling. The Talmud also says he is now in hell, punished with boiling hot excrement. What is Christ's advice as he speaks to us out of hell? The Jewish Encyclopedia quotes Jesus as telling us above all to bless the Jews. He says, "Further their well-being. Do nothing to their detriment. Whoever touches them touches even the apple of his eye." Christians, as followers of the false prophet Jesus, also deserve death. The Jewish Encyclopedia again recaps the Talmud's position. A Gentile observing the Sabbath deserves death. It says the Talmud's hatred was probably directed against the Christian Jews. These Judeo-Christians, evasively called Min, Minit, or Minim, were considered by the rabbis to be the most dangerous form of heretics of ancient times. The New Testament Gospels were writings which the rabbis considered more dangerous to the unity of Judaism than those of the pagans. A Talmudic rabbi said, "The writings of Christians deserve to be burned, for paganism is less dangerous than minute or Christianity." The Jewish Encyclopedia, in its article on Min, continues to illustrate the Talmudic hatred of Christianity. Again, we must remember, minim usually indicates the Judeo-Christians. It was forbidden to partake of meat, bread, or wine with the Christian. Scrolls of the law, tefillin, and mezuzot written by a Christian were burned. An animal slaughtered by a Christian was forbidden food. The relatives of the Christian were not permitted to observe the laws of mourning after his death, but were required to assume festive garments and rejoice. The testimony of a Christian was not admitted in evidence in Jewish courts, and an Israelite who found anything belonging to one who was a Christian was forbidden to return it to him.
The Pharisees, through their Talmud, thus gave the Jews an ethic which encouraged bigotry and isolation. But it did worse than that. It invited persecution. By the 11th century, the inhabitants of Babylon, growing weary of the self-righteousness and dishonesty of the Jews, expelled them to the west.
Migrating across North Africa and Central Europe, the great majority of Jews who had lived in Babylon for almost 1,600 years now began to find their destinies in the cities of the West. Yet in coming to the West, found their Christian neighbors extremely intolerant of the antisocial deviations Jews had taken for granted in Babylon. In order to survive, it was necessary to abandon such Babylonian traditions. But that was not as easy as it sounds. For 1,000 years, the Pharisees had commanded such deviations. Most Jews could not bring themselves to defy the authority of the Pharisees. Enter one of the giants of Judaism of all time, the great Maimonides. Maimonides, a physician and philosopher, knew that no Jew who practiced Babylonian perversions could remain alive in Christian lands. He attempted to harmonize Greek philosophy with the best points of Judaism. He hoped his rationalizations would enable Jews to abandon their antisocial customs.
Yet Maimonides was only partly successful. He was excommunicated by the Jewish community on the charge of making new laws. Nevertheless, his moderation and intellect did in fact temper the old Judaism of Babylon.
Gradually over the centuries, Jews abandoned immoral practices of the Talmud. Such practices are not observed today. In fact, most Jews are so ignorant of the Talmud itself that they do not even know that such teachings exist within their sacred literature. Yet the fact remains that when the Jews came to the West in the Middle Ages and attempted to accommodate the Talmud to Christian society, a tremendous conflict was created. In Babylon, Judaism could be perfectly consistent with the teachings of the Pharisees because the Babylonians were immoral as well. In Christian lands of the West, it became necessary to pretend that many of those teachings did not exist. Even today, religious Jews continue to venerate the Pharisees and their Talmud as the greatest source of light that Judaism will ever know. Yet, living in Christian lands, no Jew can fully perform what the Pharisees commanded. This conflict in Jewish responsibility has created a dilemma over the last 1,000 years from which Jews in the West have not emerged.
Yet even before Maimonides came on the scene in the 12th century, another dilemma was being created in Judaism far to the east. This was a dilemma not concerning the doctrines of the Jews, but over who actually was a Jew.
In their articles on Khazars, the Jewish encyclopedias tell us that in the 8th century A.D., Jewish missionaries ventured north of Babylon to the land of the Khazars between the Caspian and the Black Seas. Khazaria was a vast grassland on what is now the plains of southern Russia, inhabited by a race of merchants, artisans, and warriors of Hunnish Turkish stock. About 740 A.D., the king of the Khazars converted to Judaism and made it the state religion. Incredibly, within a few centuries, the people of Khazaria convinced themselves that they were not Gentiles after all, but the physical descendants of Abraham. Thus, by the 10th century A.D., a nation of proselyte Jews thrived in what is now central Russia. During the Middle Ages, the fierce Mongols from the east and Russians from the north drove the Khazars west out of their ancient homeland. Most settled in Eastern Europe, especially Poland, where they established communities of artisans and traders. Judaism thus became divided into two basic groups which remain today: the Ashkenazim, which are the Khazars of the east, and the Sephardic Oriental, which are Jews of Spain, Turkey, and lands bordering on the Mediterranean. Today, the Ashkenazim, or Khazars, are the vast majority, about 80% of those who call themselves Jews. The two most recent premiers of Israel illustrate these two racial types. Shimon Peres is a Sephardic Jew from authentic Jewish stock. Yitzhak Shamir, like Menachem Begin, is Ashkenazim or Khazar in origin. In Poland, these ancestors of most modern Jews thrived. In fact, they actually became more zealous Jews than their theological cousins to the west, the Sephardim. The Khazars were fascinated with that mystical aspect of Judaism called Kabbalah. Kabbalah was the Jewish form of ancient Gnosticism, a belief that God is unconscious yet everywhere, revealed in different levels of refinement throughout the universe. Of course, Judaism was always unique among ancient religions in its belief in a single conscious God, a God not only capable of creating the worlds, but of punishing evil and rewarding good. Like Eastern religions, however, the Polish Kabbalists believe that God in his purest form is utterly remote, unknowable, without opinions about right and wrong. Instead, his being filtered down through many gradations or sephirot until it reached Israel. Israel, according to the Kabbalah, was the visible, rational emanation of God in this world. Below Israel was confusion and darkness, represented by demons and the chaotic world of the Gentiles.
What excited the Khazars was that Kabbalah preached revolution. It said that Jews, as superior beings, were destined to rule the world. In the Zohar, which is the written text of Kabbalistic lore, we find the arrogance and ambition of the ancient Pharisees very much alive.
In a typical passage, the Zohar teaches, living soul refers to Israel, who have holy living souls from above, and cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth to the other peoples who are not living soul. Only by the overthrow of the Gentiles, the Zohar asserts, can Israel regain its position as God's Shekinah glory on earth. The Zohar calls Gentiles Amalekites. In a passage typical of many, the Zohar says they caused the destruction of the temple, so when God reveals himself, they will be wiped off the earth. Redemption will not be complete until Amalek will be exterminated. But once Israel shakes off Gentile dominion and Christian influence, heaven will descend to earth. The Zohar says Israel will fulfill her predestined role, ruling the world under the leadership of her Messiah.
Since the Kabbalah or Zohar was not merely a theological system, but taught the overthrow of the existing order, it was natural that before long Jews should begin to put it into practice. With the age of Voltaire and the so-called Enlightenment during the 18th century, we see a host of Jewish Kabbalists migrating west out of Poland and penetrating the very capitals of Europe. Jewish wonder workers, Bolshems as they were called, Saint Germain, Cagliostro, Frank, Falk, men of vast wealth and mystery came upon the European scene at the end of the 18th century.
In Europe, in the years preceding the French Revolution, the foundations were laid for a new order in the world. Kabbalists such as Adam Weishaupt helped establish the ultra-secret Illuminati, which became a cover for plots and intrigues that would begin the erosion of Christian civilization. At the same time, beginning with Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, many Jews began to perceive their religion not simply as a means of personal salvation, but as a way to reform society at large. Many Jewish activists said that, starting with such revolutionaries as Moses and the prophets, Israel had always had the social objective of righting injustice and taking the part of the downtrodden. It was the duty of every Jew, they said, to come to the aid of the oppressed working masses, called the proletariat, in their historic struggle against capitalistic bondage. Many Jews thus came out of the ghetto and took part in all the great revolutions of the 19th century, including the Revolution of 1829 and the Revolution of 1848. It is thus not surprising that as the 20th century dawns, we find Jews turning their attentions to the overthrow of one of the last monarchies still opposing Jewish advancement, the Romanov dynasty of Russia. It is well known that the Jews had long hoped to overthrow the Tsar. It was natural then that Jewish philosophers such as Moses Hess and Karl Marx should contrive a philosophy that could make such overthrow possible. It was also natural that international Jewish bankers of New York, London, and Hamburg should finance it. The U.S. State Department, in its 3-volume report on the origins of communism in Russia, published in 1931, reveals how Jewish-controlled German banks under the leadership of Max Warburg conspired as early as 1914 to send large payments to Lenin, Trotsky, and others in their attempts to bring down the Tsar. As part of this conspiracy, Jacob Schiff, head of the New York Jewish banking house of Kuhn Loeb, invested at least $20 million, which would be close to $1 billion today, toward the establishment of Bolshevism in Russia. In its article on socialism, the Jewish Encyclopedia, published in 1905, really admits that Jews in Russia were ripe for revolution. In Russia, socialism, has become a movement of the Jewish masses. The later Encyclopedia Judaica tells us the communist movement and ideology played an important part in Jewish life, particularly in the 1920s and 1930s, and during and after World War II. The Judaica, in fact, presents an extensive list of the most powerful Jewish leaders of Bolshevism, which included Trotsky, Sverdlov, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Litvinov, Kaganovich, and many others. The Judaica also tells us just how many Jews filled the communist ranks. It says anti-Semitism drove the bulk of Russian Jewish youth into the ranks of the Bolshevik regime. When the white Russian patriots heroically attempted to regain their freedom from the Jews, the Judaica says compact Jewish masses were utilized by the Bolsheviks to suppress such counter-revolution. Clearly, Jews and native Russians were engaged in a death struggle over the destiny of Russia. Unfortunately, the Jewish masses won. A rare photo shows the First People's Commissariat. From left to right are Uritsky, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Sverdlov, and Kaganovich, all Jewish. In 1918, intelligence services of the Western powers were buzzing with reports that communism was an international conspiracy fomented by atheistic Jews. British, Dutch, American, and other intelligence reports confirmed that Jews filled the Bolshevik ranks and that as much as 75% of all Soviet commissars were Jewish. In the Illustrated Sunday Herald of February 8, 1920, Sir Winston Churchill commented on what had almost become public knowledge. There is no need to exaggerate the part played in the creation of Bolshevism by these international and for the most part atheistical Jews. It is certainly a very great one. In the decades following the revolution, the question became, how much influence do the Jews still exert on the Soviet experiment? Although many of the Jewish kingpins in Bolshevism perished in Stalinist purges in the late 30s, none other than Nikita Khrushchev gives us an eye-opening view of just how many Jews were still in the Soviet government. Speaking to a delegation of French socialists, Khrushchev admitted in 1956 the government has found in some of its departments a heavy concentration of Jewish people, upwards of 50% of the staff. Because communism has historically been top-heavy with Jews, the Soviet policy of so-called anti-Semitism, much protested by Jews in the West, may in reality be but a ploy to distract the world from communism's Jewish past. Although most Jews have indeed been removed from high-profile positions in the Soviet hierarchy, over the last 30 years, still Jews remain highly favored when it comes to immigration to the prosperous West. Since World War II, more than 1 million Jews have been allowed to leave the Iron Curtain, sometimes in waves of up to 52,000 a year. This contrasts to the grim reality that if even one Gentile attempts to escape, he would be lucky to receive only 15 years in prison. Jews, then, have played an enormous role in the Soviet experiment. Yet, as the Jewish Encyclopedia, in its article on socialism, again tells us, the passion of many Jews to socialize the world was not confusion. As peddlers of socialism, it tells us, Jews must be reckoned among the pioneers of the socialist parties in America. As a case in point, a flood of socialistic Jews entered the FDR administration and helped pioneer the New Deal for America. The Encyclopedia Judaica says Roosevelt's liberal policies endeared him to the Jewish community, which shared with him an overriding commitment to the welfare state. It is very significant that in letting left-wing Jews into his administration, FDR set in motion a conspiracy that was soon to have the gravest repercussions. As part of his policies, FDR had a German communist, Klaus Fuchs, a scientific genius who helped mastermind the atomic bomb. Yet Fuchs also headed a ring of 8 highly influential Jews who delivered the entirety of our atomic technology to the Soviet Union in the early 1950s. They included Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, David Greenglass, Harry Gold, Sidney Weinbaum, Morton Sobel, and others. Of the 10 convicted for espionage, no less than 8 were Jewish. Later in 1957, it was discovered that the Jewish Soblin brothers delivered massive defense secrets to the Russians. They acted upon the orders of the Jewish head of the Soviet secret police, Beria. The most recent example of such treachery is the Pollard spy case, in which Jewish spy Jonathan Pollard and his wife delivered thousands of top-secret documents not to Moscow, but to Tel Aviv. All Jews, of course, are not communists, spies, or even liberals. A small minority of conservatives like economist Milton Friedman, publisher Natty Loeb, and Senator Barry Goldwater are eloquent reminders that Jews are represented on the right as well as the left. Nor should we forget that many Jews have contributed disproportionately to the good of mankind, especially in such areas as medical research, science, and the arts. Such Jews deserve our heartfelt gratitude. Never should we indict Jews as a whole for the misdeeds of some. Yet the fact remains that historically most Jews have favored the liberal agenda. Many have gone as far left as communism. For example, in the late 40s, intensive investigations by the U.S. Justice Department revealed a disproportionate number of Jews in the American Communist Party. In 1949, the 11 members of the American Politburo of the Communist Party were convicted. 6 were Jews. In 1951, the second-string Politburo was indicted. Of 21 arrested, 14 were Jewish. Also in 1951, 15 top West Coast communists were indicted. 6 of the 15 were Jewish.
Break left.
During the Vietnam conflict, while American boys died by the tens of thousands, Jews dominated the communist New Left in America. The Encyclopedia Judaica says the New Left included a disproportionate participation of Jews in the leadership and sometimes also in the ranks. It continues, Jews have been active in the United States in all radical movements, socialist and communist, old left and new. On almost every major campus in which the New Left was active, Jews were prominent in the leadership. Typically, they formed between a third to more than half the leadership and members. Jews also dominate the American Civil Liberties Union, a left-wing front which has tirelessly opposed such fundamental values as prayer in the schools, effective criminal prosecution, even the Pledge of Allegiance. The ACLU has been the subject of frequent congressional scrutiny. As early as 1931, a special congressional investigating committee prophetically described a role which has become all too familiar in recent years. It claims to stand for free speech, free press, and free assembly. But it is quite apparent that the main function of the ACLU is to attempt to protect the communists in their advocacy of force and violence to overthrow the government. Today, the ACLU is led by Jewish National Director Ira Glasser, the fifth national director in its history. According to a 1977 ACLU survey of membership, 27.3% of ACLU leaders were Jewish, 21.4% of members. The feminist movement, with its agenda of free abortions and lesbian rights, also contains a lopsided number of Jews in its national leadership. The three most influential feminists, Gloria Steinem, Bella Abzug, and Betty Friedan, are Jewish radicals. Jewish producer Norman Lear also heads People for the American Way, the liberal antagonist to Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority. People for the American Way videotapes every broadcast of national TV evangelists in hopes of ruining their ministries. Why does such Jewish-led radicalism prosper? Largely because the television media promotes it. And who owns the media? In its article on television, the Encyclopedia Judaica reveals that the big three television networks are Jewish-founded and controlled. David Sarnoff founded NBC in 1926. CBS was founded under the presidency of William S. Paley, also Jewish. ABC was an outgrowth of the NBC network, and another Jew, Leonard Goldenson, became its president. Gentiles usually occupy the visible out-front positions, but each of the three networks remain under Jewish influence or control. According to the famous Lichter-Rothman poll of...
Now, you could chime in, Naga One, anytime you feel like it.
Keep it rolling, lay on the road.
All right.
104 top-level media executives, published in Public Opinion magazine, Jews also dominate the lower levels of network broadcasting. Although Jews constitute less than 3% of the American population, a whopping 59% of TV executives surveyed were Jewish. The Encyclopedia Judaica, in its article on motion pictures, paints a similar picture of Jewish control of the movie industry. With the exception of United Artists, it says, all the large Hollywood companies were founded and controlled by Jews. The largest of all entertainment monopolies, MCA, called the Octopus because of its domination of the entertainment industry, was likewise founded and controlled by Jews, such as Jules Stein, Lou Wasserman, and Taft Schreiber. In its article on publishing, the Judaica presents lists of dozens of the largest publishers in America owned or controlled by Jews. In the Lichter-Rothman poll, it was found that 97% of media leaders surveyed favored abortion on demand, 86% favored hiring homosexuals as teachers, 57% believe that adultery is not wrong, and so on. Clearly, the liberal bias of the Jewish-controlled TV networks is indisputable. Jews are also rapidly gaining control in Congress. In 1976, there were virtually no Jewish political action committees. In 1986, there were more than 70 Jewish PACs. In 1972, there were 2 Jewish senators and 12 Jewish representatives in Congress. In 1986, there were 8 Jewish senators and 30 Jewish representatives. In 1986, more than 50% of the budget of the Democratic Party was paid for by Jews, with Jews paying 25% of the Republican budget.
As our study in the synagogue library reveals, there does exist a tendency toward Jewish domination of our society. Where is all this headed?
The Right Honorable Winston Churchill wrote, "It may well be that this same astounding race may at the present time be in the actual process of producing another system of morals and philosophy as malevolent as Christianity was benevolent, which, if not arrested, would shatter irretrievably all that Christianity had rendered possible. It would almost seem as if the gospel of Christ and the gospel of Antichrist were destined to originate among the same people." Can it be that such pervasive Jewish control which we are seeing today is but the harbinger of even greater Jewish control to come? In the book of Revelation, a great harlot is described ruling the world, riding on a horned and headed beast. Throughout the Old Testament, Israel was described as a harlot, the mother of spiritual whoredom among the nations. Is the harlot of Revelation actually Israel riding upon her false Messiah, the Antichrist?
Today, many believe Israel is on the road to the fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah. A great Jewish temple is being planned. A priestly class called the Kohanim is being readied. Ritual sacrifices are being studied. Truly, prophecy is being fulfilled in an amazing way, yet not in the happy way that most of us would like to believe.
In Israel today, effective Christianity is outlawed. If a Christian were to walk through any town in Israel passing out New Testaments, he could be sentenced to prison for 5 years. Israel is not moving toward Christ. She is moving toward her false Messiah, Antichrist. In Antichrist, Israel hopes to find all the worldly power and glory which Jesus denied her, but she will not find it. As the Bible teaches, the great harlot Israel will be thrown from the back of the beast. The beast, with his 10 Confederate military leaders, will gore and burn her with fire. This is what the Bible calls the Great Tribulation, or time of Jacob's trouble, a time when Israel, who thought she could rule the world, will experience unprecedented agony and judgment for her sins.
Since the Bible tells us that Israel is on the road to judgment by God, what should be our attitude toward her?
St. Paul tells us that Jews are indeed enemies of the gospel, yet enemies who are beloved for the sake of a remnant which shall one day be revealed. Israel is like the prodigal son, inheritor of a glorious destiny. But she is also rebellious. Like the prodigal son, she must be humbled, not by us, but by God. Someday, out of the great tribulation, a remnant of Jews will look upon him whom their fathers pierced and will plead for his forgiveness. The dry bones of Jewish unbelief will be resurrected. Jewish branches will be grafted back into the vine, which is Christ, Israel's true Messiah. Israel will become as much of a blessing as she was once a curse unto the nations. But there have always existed those who cannot see the big picture, who cannot wait for God to finish his controversy with Israel on his terms. Throughout history, movements have erupted which have attempted to solve the so-called Jewish problem in the most direct way. Yet all such anti-Semitic movements have ended in defeat. Defeat because they refused God's terms and instead resorted to violence and slander. Elevating themselves to racial superiority and debasing Jews as racial degenerates, anti-Semites have become loathsome to all mankind. In contrast, the Bible presents the perfect approach to this problem. All the prophets were heavily burdened, even angry at the transgressions of Israel. Yet when they spoke out, it was as God led them. When they chastised the people, it was not in the arm of flesh. Vehement as they had to be in denouncing sin, they never became bigots. Their message was on the highest ethical level. They told Israel she was sinful, not because she was racially degenerate, but because she had broken God's law. As would be expected, all the prophets were accused of being negative, even anti-Semitic. Jewish King Ahab called the prophet Elijah an enemy of his regime. Jeremiah was accused of being against his own people in favor of the Chaldeans. Micaiah was described as never speaking anything good, but only criticism. Even Christ and the apostles were called enemies of the Jews, yet they spoke out.
The great figures of the Bible provide a pattern of how we should respond to the Jews today. The prophets and apostles preached the good news to Israel, yet they were very wary, very realistic concerning rabbinic deception. Our Lord warned us to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Considering the Pharisaic origins of modern rabbinic Judaism, his words can only mean, be wary of rabbinic Judaism. As we saw earlier, rabbinic Judaism is inherently ambitious. It will forever attempt to establish itself as the dominant factor in society.
If Zionism is unnaturally encouraged, as it has been by the church over the last century, then it will rise to a position that is intolerable. Inevitably, mankind, smarting under its presumptions, will rise against it in new waves of anti-Semitism. An angry humanity will pit itself against the Jews. The Jews will fight back. This is what is happening in the Middle East today, as Jew and Gentile quarrel over the land of promise. Who owns this land? In her beginning, God promised that through the physical people of Israel, a spiritual blessing, Jesus Christ, would be given to the world. Just as a physical people was necessary, so also was a physical land. Throughout the Old Testament, God repeatedly tells the Hebrews that the land of Palestine is promised to them and their seed forever. Yet in order to occupy this land, Israel must be obedient to him. If not, God repeatedly demonstrated in the Bible that he would actually invite the peoples surrounding Israel to invade and occupy. Only when the Hebrews finally cried unto God in repentance did he allow them to possess a land dedicated to obedience. God's demand for obedience is thus a standard before which both Christian and Jew must bow. Moses, a spiritual colossus, wanted to go into the land, but God would not let him because of one infraction. Today, Israel has rejected God's Son for 20 centuries and given first allegiance to those who crucified him, the Pharisees. Yet we are told that God is delighted that they dwell in the land. Does obedience no longer matter? It does. Someday, as in the days of Joshua and Nehemiah, Israel will give God the obedience he demands. They will return to this land in blessing. But until that time, as long as Israel continues to force her unbiblical occupation on the Arabs, this region will only know strife. The Arab world will continue to try to expel the Jews. The Jews will strike back and forth, generation after generation. The discord will be unending. This land will continue to bleed.
It is the duty of every Christian to support the humanitarian needs of Jews, to preach the gospel to them. But it is not our duty to assure them that a land of promise may be occupied without obedience. Neither is it our duty to fight a war in the Middle East in defense of Israel's unbiblical claim.
It is time we return to God's law, a law as old as this land, as old as the God who gave it to the Jews. If we ignore God's requirement of obedience, we only postpone that glorious day when Israel will become what she was meant to be, a place of rest and healing to the nations. If America is to continue to possess her land of blessing, she also must return to the God of her fathers. It is true, the Bible prophesies that Jewish international control, or Babylon the Great, will gradually come to dominate the world. Yet the Bible also promises that if a nation turns to him in repentance, he will postpone the judgment he himself has predicted. God is already showing us how he can slow down the Zionist timetable. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, ostensibly to destroy the PLO threat from the north. Yet in doing so, she unleashed a reign of barbarity and destruction unequaled in this decade. Not only did Israel bomb Beirut to rubble, killing thousands of civilians, but she actually encouraged the infamous Shatila massacre by providing aerial lighting for the three-day slaughter of hundreds of innocent victims. Despite the bad publicity surrounding such atrocities, Israel was confident that her massive firepower and support from America would make Lebanon her conquered colony to the north. Yet God judged Israel. Like Pharaoh in the Red Sea, he caused Israel to flounder. Today, Israel is a nation in turmoil, divided, unable to regain the respect of the world. Although Jewish power continues to increase ominously in the United States, the fact means that God is able to slow it down, but only if we as a nation turn again to our Creator. We must repent of the national sins which have weakened our moral fiber and allowed the forces of Satan to dominate us.
In a moment, we'll explain how you may educate others concerning this threat. Yet education in itself is not enough to hold back a demonically empowered conspiracy. We have to have God's power, a power which only comes through total consecration to Him.
The communist movement demands that every true Marxist be willing to give up everything, even his own life, for the cause. If we are to have power against the Antichrist, we must do as much. We must give our lives totally to Christ, willing to do anything, give up anything, he might ask. Only by such a death to inner hidden rebellion can we really have power in the spiritual realm. Only by such sanctification can we know what it is to walk with God as true Christian soldiers, capable of action, but also of hearing the Holy Spirit's voice of love and restraint.
The first step toward holding back Zionist expansion is thus: national revival, a transformation of hearts that begins in each one of us and then spreads across this broad land.
But just as importantly, the church in America must turn from its unconditional support of Israel. For 3/4 of a century, the church has aligned itself with bloody and arrogant men in the Middle East. In bidding them Godspeed, it has become a partaker of their injustices. Tragically, such a policy has alienated the Muslim world from the gospel. Because the church has historically ignored the plight of the Palestinians and sided with their oppressors, the Israelis, the Arab world has closed its ears to the message of Jesus Christ. In fact, by giving unconditional approval to Israel, the church, more than any other institution, has helped build up the walls of that system, which will ultimately become Babylon the Great.
The church must now face the fact that Israel today is not the fulfillment of the sublime prophecies of the Old Testament, prophecies which are conditional upon obedience. Instead, modern Israel is the first stage in Satan's plan to take this world from Christ and give it to Antichrist, Israel's false Messiah, who will rule the world from Jerusalem.
This scenario is borne out by none other than Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, one of the great founders of Israel. Recorded in an astonishing article in Look magazine, Ben-Gurion predicted that a one-world system presided over by Jerusalem will be set up in the near future. All continents will become united in a world alliance, at whose disposal will be an international police force. All armies will be abolished, and there will be no more war. In Jerusalem, the United Nations, a truly united nations, will build a shrine of the prophets to serve the federated union of all continents. This will be the seat of the Supreme Court of mankind, to settle all controversies among the federated continents, as prophesied by Isaiah. Ben-Gurion's vision of Israel in dominion of the world is identical with the vision of the great harlot, ruling the nations, as given in Revelation 17.
Yet it's a vision which may be postponed. If enough of God's people rededicate themselves to Him and turn from support of a system which seeks their ruin, then Zionist world control can be turned back, at least within our time.
I don't know about it being turned back in our time. What you think about that?
I mean, everything he spit on there, that was all facts. I mean, the Jews, the so-called Jews today, are the Khazarians. Like, if you go do the research, you will see that in the beginning, Ashkenazi Jews only made up like 3% of the Jewish population, and then like over the centuries, they ended up being 97% of the Jewish population.
The population?
You got to ask yourself where the rest of the other Jewish population come from. I mean, where did they go?
Well, you mean they went from 97 to 3, or they went from 3 to 97?
Well, let me see if I can pull it up for you.
Yeah, pull it up. Share it on the screen. Show the people what you're talking about. You feel me? That was Ted Pike, man, a Christian pastor. So that's how some of the Christians talk about the small hats. And we're gonna do a video on how some of the
Okay,
small
so check
hats
it out.
talk about the Christians.
Now, this is just a simple Google search, right? And this is just Wiki. You can go straight to Wiki and find this. Nothing amazing.
Nothing amazing. Where is it at?
Right here,
There you
read
go.
it.
There you go. Hold on. Oh, see.
Right here, it's this paragraph right here. Read it.
I don't know why I won't share. Hold on. Okay, I gotta remove this. You gotta zoom in on that. It says zoom in on that.
All right.
Here we go. Where you want me to start at?
As a proportion of Jewish world's Jewish population.
You got a TV on right behind you?
Now I'm finna mute out.
Okay. As a proportion of the world Jewish population, Ashkenazism were estimated to be 3% in the 11th century, rising to 92% in
Now pause right there.
1930.
Pause right there, cuz. How you go from 3% in the 11th century? Now we all know 11th century is like 1100 AD, right? How you go from being 3% to 92%?
So, where was this at?
You said where was it at?
Yeah, this population in Europe.
All in Europe. This is all Europe. Like this way it was.
Okay.
Let's read it. Let's say, as a proportion of the world Jewish population, y'all see that, right? So all the blue is where you
world, the world, Craig.
Right. So check it out. I want y'all to notice where they got it all, where it's all dark blue and all that bullshit. Like, just look at the world. The map.
I see it now.
The Ashkenazim were estimated to be 3% in the 11th century, rising to 92% in the 1930s. So you looking at like less than 800 years, they magically became 92%. Right. So where did the 97% go? Like when in the 11th century, before the 11th century, when they only made up 3% of the Jewish population, where did the other 97% go for them to rise up to be the 92? You see, you can't say Ashkenazis were 3% in the 11th century, and then 800 years they became 92%. How was that possible? Did the other 97% of the Jewish population just stop breeding or something? What happened to them?
You mean the other 97% of Europe? The other 7%? The other Europeans, where did they go? That's the question.
Well, no, see, because all the other Europeans aren't being considered Jews. It's only this particular group that's being called Jews.
I understand that, but how did the population go from 3% to 92% in 800 years? That's the question.
Yeah. How did they go from 3% to 92% in?
Was there migration going on, and a lot of people left? Because that is
the
crazy.
Ashkenazi population significantly diminished by the Holocaust carried out by Nazi Germany in World War II, which killed around 6 million Jews.
King J says
practically every European Jewish family.
King J says it looks as if they migrated down from the Caucasus into the Levant.
Who did?
King J says that. The comments on the screen right there.
I put some links in the private chat.
Go ahead, show them. Put them up.
All right.
DAD Thousands of the surviving Jewish inhabitants fled Judea after the Romans burned the Second Temple and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Thousands of the surviving Jewish inhabitants fled Judea and settled in other areas throughout the Mediterranean and elsewhere. Over the passage of time, a significant number of Jews established themselves in Germany, primarily in the area known as the Rhineland. During the medieval period, the Jews living in Germany identified themselves as Ashkenazim. The German Jews adopted the title of Ashkenaz for a couple of reasons. One, to distinguish themselves from other Jewish communities, such as the Sephardic Jews of Spain, and to signify the geographical location in which they built a civilization. For the name Ashkenaz is found in the Bible, where in Genesis chapter 10, verse 3, Ashkenaz is listed as the grandson of Japheth, one of the three sons of Noah. Now, traditionally speaking, it is believed that the descendants of Japheth went on to settle within the territories of Europe after God came down and confused the languages of Babel. And this European location, namely the Rhineland, was discerned by the Jews as a land of Ashkenaz. Additionally, though the Jews claimed descent from Shem, Noah's second son, these Semitic peoples took upon themselves a non-Semitic title in order to cement their identity as European Jewry. Even though what has been presented thus far regarding the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews may stem from a more mainstream account, there has also come down to us a quite popular theory which associates the Ashkenazi Jews with a Turkic tribe which originated from Central Asia, who in turn converted to Judaism in the 8th century of the Common Era. And these Turkish converts to Judaism are identified as the Khazars. The Khazars were a semi-nomadic people who eventually developed into an empire, beginning in the 6th century until they were defeated by the Kievan Rus in the 10th century, and soon afterwards seemed to mysteriously disappear from history. At its epoch, the Khazarian Empire encompassed the territories between the Black and Caspian Seas and stretched from the Caucasus Mountains to the south all the way up to the Volga River in the north. Before their conversion to Judaism, around the year 740 AD, the Khazars practiced a form of shamanism, much like the other Turkic tribes of Central Asia. Now there has come down to us a splendid story, or legend rather, which tells the tale of how the Khazars became a Jewish nation. For during the reign of the Khazarian king Bulan, the religions of Christianity and Islam were the dominant faiths in the region. Wanting to adopt a more organized religion for his people, the Kagan, or king of the Khazars, heard the religious arguments of a Christian priest, a Muslim imam, and a Jewish rabbi. The Khazar Kagan ultimately chose Judaism over Christianity and Islam, due to Judaism being the root religion of the other two faiths. Thus, in the mid-8th century AD, did the Turkish Khazars become Jews by mass conversion. Returning to the Ashkenazim, it has been recorded that tens of thousands of Ashkenazi Jews migrated out of the Rhineland in the beginning of the 15th century and then settled in parts of Eastern Europe, such as Poland and Lithuania, for example. But even before this Ashkenazi migration into Eastern Europe, there had been Jewish settlements in Ukraine going all the way back to the 7th century. It has also been argued that the Jewish presence in Eastern Europe and the various areas of Western Russia did not come from Ashkenazi Jews migrating from Germany, but rather this Jewish element derived its genesis from the Turkish Khazars, whose empire was once directly located in between the geographical setting of Eastern Europe and Russia, where Jewish communities had later been established. So, instead of Ashkenazi Jews migrating out of Germany, making up the Jewish populations of Eastern Europe and Russia, the Jews in these territories could have actually been the remnants of the Khazars. This hypothesis could also explain why the Khazars disappeared from the historical record after they were conquered by the Rus in the 10th century. If this theory is correct, then the majority of the European and Russian Jews are not Ashkenazim, but rather Khazarian. Now, it is of no surprise that the bulk of modern-day Ashkenazi Jews disagree with this Jewish Khazarian claim, which in turn has sparked debate among Jewish intellectuals who do indeed provide strong arguments in the support of their genuine Jewish origins and at the same time debunk the belief which teaches Ashkenazi Jews are in fact racially Turkish and therefore a non-Semitic people. One such argument against the Jewish Khazar link states that because there are no linguistic similarities between the Jewish dialect of Yiddish in comparison to the various Turkish languages, then there can be no Turkic origins in relation to the German or European Jews. Another argument in support of the Jewishness of the Ashkenazim has to do with cultural elements, for the cuisine, music, and literature of the Ashkenazi Jews are completely bereft of any Turkish elements. Additionally, the Jewish theory of how they settled in Germany relates that the Jews originally migrated from the Middle East via Italy into Germany and not through Khazaria. In conclusion, the theory of the Ashkenazi Jews descending from the Turkish Khazars is indeed very controversial and also extremely insulting towards the Jewish people as a whole. It has not been my attempt to usurp the racial and religious integrity of the Ashkenazi
Yeah, I don't
Jews,
buy that.
but rather it has been the job.
I don't buy that one.
In 3 weeks. There's a new next-gen
There you
AI,
go, but you know,
and it's so lifelike that people genuinely question if it's actually breathing. But
here's the Khazarian hypothesis. Since there is something of an overlap between the limits of the Khazar Empire, which had some kind of connection, possibly a conversion to Judaism, perhaps in the 8th century, and the population of Jews that by the time you get to the 20th century, the vast bulk of Ashkenazi Jews are living in Eastern Europe. The Khazar hypothesis says that the Jews that call themselves Ashkenazim coming from Eastern Europe are not descendants of the German Ashkenazim. They are actually descendants from the Khazars, and that's it in a nutshell. Now, why should we care about this is something that we'll talk about in the next video, but that's the essence of the Khazar hypothesis, that the Jews who originate from Eastern Europe are primarily descended from this Turkic tribe living in Central Asia. Perhaps one of the most significant thinkers and writers on this period is Professor Shaul Stamfer of Hebrew University. Great scholar, has written quite a bit on Eastern European Jewish history, and he's published quite a bit on Khazaria in particular. He has a very jaundiced view of the entire conversion process as a whole, the entire conversion story, which I'll speak about in the next video. But he says there are a few really clear reasons why we can say that Ashkenazi Jews are not descended from the Khazars. First of all, there is no DNA evidence to support this. Now, if you go back in my earlier videos, as I've been doing these over the last 10 years, there's been growing amounts of data, and you'll see slight changes even in my own presentation because of the appearance of new data. DNA evidence is one of the most exciting tools that historians have in their toolbox. And when it comes to the question of biological descent,
DNA evidence.
Halachic identity, Jewish identity by Jewish law, which is a different thing, although they tend to overlap like a Venn diagram. It's really clear that there's no DNA evidence or a very tiny element of DNA evidence to support the idea of a Khazar origin to Eastern European Ashkenazi Jewry. Now, one exception to that rule is the Professor Eran El-Haik, who's written some interesting things on this, but he remains controversial, and most scholars are not accepting the research that he's presented specifically on Khazaria. Now, without being a scientist and be able to get into the real nuts and bolts of this, what I've read about this is that he prepared in 2013, I think it was first published, an analysis of about 1,300 Y chromosomes, 1,300 people looking at their Y chromosomes to try to see what the similarities were between Jews and about 75 odd other nationalities. Unfortunately, the sample was really, really small. Of the Jews, only 8 fit the specific parameters that we're looking at right now. That's a tiny number to really make huge statements about the vast majority of Ashkenazi Jews. Secondly, more significantly, the number of Khazar individuals studied were precisely 0, because there are no Khazars today. And in fact, we haven't had any Khazars for about 1,000 years. There has been no one walking around who claims Khazar.
Look, how can you if they all claim to be Jews? Look, I don't know, it's like logically fallacious, right? So they're saying, oh, we don't have no Khazarian people to test the DNA against because they don't exist anymore. Yeah, but that's because y'all don't call yourself Khazars anymore. You call yourself Ashkenazi Jews. So the Ashkenazi Jews are researching if Ashkenazi Jews are Khazars, and they're finding zero Khazarian DNA. You don't say. You don't fucking say. That's just funny to me. Hold on.
Our descent to whom we can go to for genetic data. In other words, you can't compare Jews to Khazars if you don't have any Khazars to actually say, oh, you're a Khazar. Great, let's take your DNA. So what he did was he essentially guessed, an educated guess, using Georgians and Armenians, which live roughly in the same area. But with 1,000 years of population movement, it's really hard to say that that's reasonable at all. So it's considered widely to be a very unreliable estimate, and most scholars, particularly most historians, are not accepting this limited data evidence to suggest.
Keep in mind when he say most scholars are rejecting it, what he means to say is most Jewish scholars are rejecting it. Watch it, because they'll be like, nah, this shit ain't real. Watch this. If it's not real, then why would you type in Khazarian conversion, right? Look, everybody lying? Everybody lying. Try this.
Empower your students to be more authentic, impactful writers with Grammarly's comprehensive AI writing assistance. Use
The problem with most conquests is that they only breed more wars and violence, and each time an empire expands its borders, new enemies are waiting further afield. Such was the case in the middle of the 7th century when the Umayyad Caliphate expanded into the South Caucasus region, only to become enemies with the Turkic Khazar Khanate immediately. Even though the Umayyads were replaced by the Abbasids soon after, the conflicts between the Arabs and Khazars continued for 150 years. In this video, we will talk about the Arab-Khazar Wars, many battles and raids that happened during them, as well as the diplomatic situation involving the Kievan Rus, Volga Bulgars, Eastern Romans, and many others, as we describe the rise and fall of the Khazar Khanate. This week, our YouTube members and patrons will be watching the next installment in our series on the Second Punic War, as we cover the Battle of Trebia, the first direct engagement of the war between the Romans and the Carthaginians. The support of our YouTube members and patrons allows us to continue releasing these free videos without worrying about the unstable YouTube ad revenue, and lets us be more choosy in terms of our sponsors. You can join their ranks via the links in the description and get access to 2 weekly exclusive videos and more than 150 right now, including the series on the Pacific War, Fall of Sparta, First Punic War, Italian Reunification Wars, Albigensian Crusade, History of Prussia, Biography of Sulla, Reconquista, World War II North African Campaign, Persian Wars, and much more. Thanks for your kind support. Much has been written of the conflicts between the Eastern Roman Empire and its Asian rival powers, the Sassanid Empire of Persia and the Arab Caliphates. But throughout nearly the whole of these long struggles, a third major power lay to the north, less well remembered, but a vital part of the history of Europe and Asia both. This was the Khazar Khaganate, a Turkic kingdom that never fully abandoned its nomadic origins, even as it established a wealthy, sophisticated kingdom, recognized as an important regional power by its settled neighbors, and afforded all the respect of a fellow empire. The earliest recorded entrance of the Khazars into European history is possibly as part of the Hunnic Empire of Attila, with a tribe referred to by Roman diplomat and chronicler Priscius as the Acatsias, who were led by a chief called Caridach, listed among Attila's vassals in 448. The Romans approached Caridach with bribes as part of an effort to undermine Attila's confederation. but these efforts failed, with Karadach keeping the bribe but spurning Roman efforts to goad him into rebellion. Though the connection of these Akatsias to the later Khazars is disputed and far from definite, a later Arab account of the Khazar Khaganate does detail the social division between so-called Ak-Khazar and Kara-Khazar, or white and black Khazars, seemingly a division of social class, with the Ak-Khazar fitting the Akatsia name given by a diplomat who would only have been dealing with the elites and leadership. Whether the Khazars were indeed part of Attila's confederation, or the Akatsiri an unrelated Hunnic...
Hold on. We're going to deal with that white Khazars and the black Khazars later on, because that's really interesting. We're going to have to dig off further into that.
Tribe, concrete evidence of their presence and power would emerge with the 6th century reign of Sassanid Shahenshah Khosrow Anushirvan, who recorded victories against them and built fortifications to ward off their raids, but also married a Khazar bride in a short-lived bid for alliance. The Western Turkic Khaganate, or Gökturks, took the place of Attila's Hunnic Empire between the mid-6th and mid-7th centuries, but even while subordinate to this new power, the Khazars loomed larger than before in accounts of the era, though the use of Khazar by many Roman sources to refer to the Turkic Khaganate as a whole makes some accounts difficult to attribute properly. Still, it is clear that alongside raids into Georgia and Armenia, Khazar warriors made their way onto many battlefields, often as allies or mercenaries fighting for the Eastern Romans, but at other times battling against them as fierce foes. In 627, while the Prophet Muhammad was leading the first Muslims and the warriors of Medina against Mecca, an alliance between the Western Khagan Tongyapku and Rome was formed, with his vassal Khazar horsemen playing a major role in Emperor Heraclius' campaign against Persia. This formed the beginnings of a partnership that would hold largely intact through the coming century of war with the Caliphate that both powers would endure. The actions of the Khazars during this last Byzantine-Sassanid war would also highlight how quickly their nation was taking up the trappings of their more settled neighbors. Upon capturing the city of Tbilisi from the Sassanids, the Khazar Khan is recorded to have sent envoys to examine the work of the city's artists and craftsmen, with the recorded techniques and resettled talent proving in the long term a richer prize than plunder from the city's sacking. While this may instead refer to Tongyapku, as previously mentioned, the growing wealth and production base of the Khazars is also demonstrated by its armies, with consistent descriptions of well-armored Khazar horsemen setting them apart from the nomadic light cavalry armies of their neighbors.
Michael's big gift sale is here. Get up to 50% off thousands of last-minute gifts. Shop now at Michael's.
Luke, what's going on over there?
I'm doing the work. I'm doing the...
Unfortunately, the collapse of the Sassanids would bring a new enemy to the Khazars' doorstep barely a decade later. The explosive period of Islamic expansion under Caliph
I gotta
Umar
bust a move. I'm about to
and
end this here
Khalid
shortly.
Ibn al-Walid coincided with a period of similar
Gotta bust a
turmoil
move.
and transformation in the steppes, with the Gökturks losing control.
All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. Y'all know what it is. That was Ted Pike, the other Israel. Then we went into some of the Khazar connections with Anu. Make sure you tap back in with us. You already know. Tonight we got King J coming up in a few hours, and check back in to see what we got tonight.